Hello and welcome to the second instalment of Politics Live, Upstart's live broadcast dedicated to bringing you the latest from the 2016 federal election. We're providing running analysis of the campaign by recapping the news of the week and asking how the strategy of each party is playing out more broadly. I'm Rudi Edsall, your host. I'm joined by Uni Poll Watch student editor Matthew Elmas.
Hey.
And Naim Kurt, Upstart Live's political correspondent.
Hello, fantastic to be here.
It is, isn't it? Just wonderful to be down here in the Upstart bunker.
Yeah.
Yes, it's become a bit of a Friday ritual for us. Anyway, I'll kick things off. We'll recap the headlines of the week, guys. So we had an early start rather than your historic sort of Monday morning start. We started on the Sunday evening with the leaders' debate. They had that at the National Press Club. Bit of a fizzer, I sort of thought. But anyway, Prime Minister Turnbull, to use his full title, he was quizzed on his personal politics differing from his party politics, whilst opposition leader Bill Shorten dealt with questions over his party's asylum seeker policy. On Monday morning, Shorten moved his campaign up to Queensland. He promised $500 million in funding for the Great Barrier Reef, while Turnbull, he tried to capture the spotlight by focusing on STEM education. Didn't quite work though. Labor managed to keep attention by announcing that Mullindiri McCarthy will be the replacement for outgoing Senator Nova Peris. The Independents made all the headlines on Tuesday with a who's who of coalition frontbenchers lining up to whack Nick Xenophon in media appearances. They claim that he's an unpredictable loose cannon and that a vote for his party, the Nick Xenophon team, is a waste. One Nation leader also Pauline Hanson, she also came under attack from the Prime Minister. She was called an unwelcome presence in the Australian Parliament. From there, though, the day got worse for Turnbull. He was dogged by protesters and an appearance at the University of New South Wales. Struggled with that one. On Wednesday, media attention shifted to the Coalition's New South Wales Senate ticket, with Jim Molan, who was relegated to the 7th spot, retweeting a number of critical statements regarding the decision. Attention soon shifted to the Coalition, though, due to the super headache that they've been having. Revelations surfaced that many Liberal Party supporters and financial backers were decidedly unhappy with their proposed changes to superannuation concessions. It led Arthur Sinodinos, the Cabinet Secretary, to tell Sky News that the party would undergo consultations in relation to the policy after the election. Thursday played host to a repatriation ceremony for 33 diggers killed in Vietnam. But curiously, neither the Prime Minister nor Bill Shorten attended the event, even though they were both in New South Wales. Malcolm Turnbull and Scott Morrison were waging a so-called war of their own, however, attacking Labor vehemently for their anti-business policies, while Turnbull continued to be grilled on superannuation and divide within the Liberal Party supporter base. He clarified, saying there'll be no changes to the policy outlined in the budget. So it's winter now, we're in June, but things are heating up on the campaign trail, Matt.
Yeah, we're, four and a little bit. Well, I guess today's less than 30, or I think we're getting to around the 1 month mark. I think the ABC was out this morning saying this is hump day as far as the election campaign goes. But we did get an early start to the week. Sunday night was the leaders' debate, and that really set the stage for the week. There was a lot of criticism over the leaders' debate, at least on social media. A lot of commentators coming out saying it was more like a dual press conference running than any kind of back and forth between both the leaders, which was disappointing. And I think in response to that, we had lots of people coming out and even criticising the National Press Club and saying that, look, they should change the format and it should be more informal.
And there was questions brought up too that perhaps even the Greens should have a seat at the leaders' debate as well, because it's only two voices there. They're saying there should be a third voice as well now that they're becoming sort of more mainstream major party.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they got to spot the regional leaders debate, which was a bit funny because most of their support comes from inner urban areas in Melbourne and Batman and in inner Sydney and all that kind of stuff. So, that was certainly interesting. There's definitely an interesting discussion to be had there as to whether or not Richard Di Natale should be a part of those debates. But as far as the debate went itself, I mean, really all we saw was Malcolm Turnbull give out his policy platform, and the same with Bill Shorten. Interestingly enough, though, Laura Tingle did ask Malcolm Turnbull a question about his politics in relation to his party's politics, which has actually come into the news again this week.
Yeah, because Tony Abbott spoke on that, didn't he? And he said it's really a thing when you become the leader of the party, you have to give up some of your ideals and take on what the rest of the party...
Is it really... it's not really a state secret, though, that Turnbull doesn't necessarily align with the Liberal Party's policies in a lot of ways, though.
It's not, and the Labor Party will continue to trumpet that until the day he's kicked out of office, or the day he loses his prime ministership. So it's what I did think was interesting though was, I think it was yesterday, he appeared at a ultra-conservative think tank group, the one led by Cory Bernardi, at a fundraiser there, and I think they raised several $100,000 for Senate campaigning in South Australia, and it was very interesting to see him appear there as well, especially in a room that had pieces of the monarchy, sort of the Queen's head on photographs around there, and him being a staunch Republican. It was very unusual to see someone who's considered very much a small L Liberal backing in
the conservative
the
right,
very
or the,
conservative
as they
right.
call them, the uglies. Yeah, well, it's sort of interesting because, when Malcolm Turnbull did roll Tony Abbott, it was a question of, look, are we going to see a different Liberal Party now? We're going to see a Liberal Party that are going to back things like safe schools. They're going to back things like just a straight parliament vote for marriage equality. I think Turnbull's a bit of a keen fox in that way. He knows when he doesn't have the numbers, he needs to cave, and then when he does have the numbers, he's willing to plant his feet a little bit more, and that's kind of what we're seeing happening with superannuation this week.
He's once bitten on that front, isn't he? He clearly didn't have the climate change numbers last time. It cost him dearly. Yeah,
indeed. And speaking of climate change, I want to talk about the Great Barrier Reef a bit because that was breaking at the start of the week. The Labor Party, they were announcing $500 million in funding for the reef at the start of the week, which is, I think, $372 million. I think that's the figure, more than the coalition have committed so far. It's definitely an emerging election issue, especially this year with the coral bleaching having happened in the previous months. And what was extremely interesting was at the start of the week, Malcolm Turnbull didn't really have a very good response to Labor's policy proposals, merely saying that, we're going to commit to global targets on climate change, when there's been a lot of research that's come out in the last couple of years even that says the predominant problem for the reef is sediment runoffs and nitrogen runoffs from agriculture in Queensland. So Malcolm Turnbull not really addressing that there.
It is a huge issue. I mean, I was in Queensland maybe 1.5 years ago, and we went to the Great Barrier Reef, and everyone up there in the tourism industry is especially sensitive to any sort of criticism around the Great Barrier Reef, around ideas that there's coral bleaching going on, and they're very sensitive to it, and probably understandably so when they've got such a huge industry tied into the coral reef. And I was up there and I really didn't see anything spectacular that I thought would be. It was very kind of bland, I think, and I think it's certainly an issue that people are concerned about.
Yeah, definitely. And at the same time, I think now we're going to see it kind of dive off. There was, I think yesterday, a leaked document that came out that showed that actually there was research done that said what the reef really needed was $16 billion in funding to clean up a lot of the issues that they're having. And that's at least, 10 times more than either party are willing to commit. And I can't imagine them committing anything near that number either.
The government came under attack too for trying to lobby the United Nations to get the barrier reef removed from their reports on its endangerment.
Yeah, that Greg Hunt, he tweeted during the week, wasn't he saying, we've taken we've gotten the reef off the endangered list, and it came under severe fire for that comment. It felt...
Yeah, well, especially if the news around there. I think they said something like $300,000 had been spent of taxpayer money of him flying overseas and lobbying other nations to not have Australia included on this list. So probably both major parties don't have great standing on this issue at the moment.
No, they certainly do not. You're listening to Politics Live with Rudi Edsall, Matt Elmas and Naim Kurt. We'll move now on to personal finance. You would think that's generally slightly firmer ground for the coalition. Maybe not this time around. Superannuation, a hot topic this week. Matt, some super headaches around, I believe.
Yeah, well, I think we came up with that term yesterday. I'm actually quite proud of it.
We came up with that term? No, you came up with that term.
I will claim full
responsibility.
Credit and responsibility for that. 7:30. I think that's a perfect title for a segment. I am available if you need me. But superannuation's really been an issue this week. We've seen the coalition actually been trying to deal with this emerging issue that's kind of reminiscent of Labor in the last couple of weeks with asylum seekers. The party definitely seems to be divided, or at least the financial backers and supporters. There are a lot of them who don't like it. We've seen the IPA come out, and they've been quite against the changes.
These are backers of the Liberal Party.
Yeah, backers of the Liberal Party, and also the kind of more right wing of the coalition, the IPA, obviously they've come out and they've said, look, these are really bad changes. And what's been interesting is that even after Arthur Sinodinos came out and tried to kind of downplay the criticisms that were coming out, saying, look, we'll have consultations after the election, we might change it. Turnbull coming out the next morning and saying, no, there's going to be no changes. We're going to plant our feet and this is a good policy and it's not going to change and it's going to make the system fairer, which is quite a different Malcolm Turnbull to the Malcolm Turnbull we were seeing that caved on, say, schools about a month or so ago.
Is it a case of him like picking his battles in that sense? He's decided to let, say, schools through to the keeper in a sense, and maybe he's willing to stand on the hill that is superannuation?
Yeah, well, this has been an issue that's been floating below the surface ever since the budget. I think it was a day after the budget came out, there was a little bit of chatter in the media that, there are a lot of Liberal Party backers not happy with the superannuation thing, but it kind of got drowned out by company tax cuts.
And a few senior leaders became a bit unstuck too this week trying to discuss this superannuation policy. Of course, the Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, was one of the more notable ones.
Yeah, well, definitely. Superannuation's not, the easiest issue to talk about, but
the criticism was that she was a part of the party room when that decision was made during the budget week, and she should have been across the details more, seeing it's such a core part of the coalition's budget strategy.
No, that was most definitely a criticism, and I think she kind of downplayed it pretty well afterwards. She kind of, rather than trying to get sunk into a discussion that she wasn't prepared for, she just said, look, this is a gotcha moment. She kind of put it back onto the journos and just said, look, you're trying to catch me out, this is all you're just attacking me, and I think that kind of lessened the blow. We saw kind of the opposite strategy of that coming with a Green Senator, Sarah Hanson-Young from South Australia. She took the opposite direction. She actually tried to explain it without being prepared, and that ended up, much worse for her.
We might have a little bit more on that later. Spoilers.
Yeah.
Hashtag spoiler.
Something Dutton of the... No. Well, with superannuation, just to clarify, essentially they want to increase the Liberal Party want to increase the tax contributions from 15 to 30% for people earning more than $250,000 a year, which, by the way, Labor have also committed to. The point where they diverge from Labor, though, is that they essentially want to bring in a lifetime cap on after-tax contributions after $500,000, and actually they haven't been completely clear on whether that will be retrospective. So that means that people who have already contributed and invested under those rules will have to suffer a rule change as well, and we've seen the Labor Party be quite critical of that. But at the same time, they also want to tax what they call retirement phase earnings after $1.6 million. So with Super, there are two phases. There's a contribution phase, and then there's an earnings phase, or a working phase and a retirement phase. I think that may have been where Miss Hanson-Young got a bit pulled up during the week. They essentially want to tax that retirement phase for people that have over $1.6 million in their super account. Malcolm Turnbull says that it will make 96% of Australians better off. I'm not sure where he got those numbers, but if those are the numbers that he's running with, what do you think, Kurt? Is this something Labor are going to have to agree on eventually, given that Malcolm Turnbull is championing this fairer approach for all Australians?
I think Labor have probably been a bit hesitant to have things retrospectively applied. I think we saw that with the negative gearing of housing, so I'm not sure how their position will change on this. Maybe you have an idea, I don't know.
Yeah, look, I think if Turnbull does return government, he takes this to the Parliament after the election, then I think it's definitely going to be politically a little bit difficult for Labor to say, look, we can completely oppose this, given that Malcolm Turnbull has this messaging out there that's, look, we're going to make this fairer for 96% of Australians. So, maybe there'll be one or two amendments, but if Malcolm Turnbull has the numbers, then I think in his own party, then I think we'll be seeing that this will be one of the policies that will probably go through.
It's pretty clear that this is this is a policy that's going to play out over a longer period of time than just now. So maybe we should move on from it ourselves. Maybe this war on business that this so-called war on business that Scott Morrison is trying to position the Labor Party having run is maybe they're trying to direct the conversation away from super, Matt.
Yeah, well, the war on business was quite interesting, but it was a bit poorly timed in a way because there was the repatriation ceremony for 33 diggers in Vietnam, and at the very same time on the very same day they were using messaging. Labor declaring a war on business. They were using these violent metaphors. So there were a few commentators in the media, I think on Sky News and even in the ABC, that kind of raised the question: is this a little bit inappropriate?
You'd think that their media advisors and campaign strategists would just be pulling their hair out when they're seeing their representatives going out in the media and using that kind of language.
But the thing is, though, that this kind of combative language is that not where the Liberal Party do their best work? Is this not where what the coalition is sort of what they? I mean, you think back to the last election, and they basically ran on a platform of all-out war. Are they not just trying to recreate that same atmosphere, perhaps?
Yeah, but at the same time, I think doing it at a time where they could come under criticism, given that the repatriation ceremony was going on, was maybe a bit of an oversight. But I mean, I don't think this is just coalition kind of stuff. We've seen Labor come out with messaging in previous elections and even at this election that's similar to this. I mean, last week we saw Operation Black Hole, and the war on business is really a continuation of this from the coalition, and both parties definitely play their part in that kind of messaging, because it does hit home and it does make for a good soundbite. But this was kind of compounded by the fact that even though Malcolm Turnbull was in New South Wales on the day of the repatriation ceremony on Thursday, he didn't attend. Neither did Bill Shorten, who was also in New South Wales at a point during that day. Neither leader attended this ceremony, and there were people in the media during that time, on Sky News, for example, and on commentators at the ABC as well, just going, well, why aren't they there? It doesn't make that much sense.
It's not a brilliant look, no. What did you think of it?
Yeah,
Naim?
Certainly you'd expect them to attend there. These are the kind of things that politicians love to soak up, sort of turning up to memorial events like that where they can show a bit of patriotism and fervotism, and also some solemnness as well in honouring and respecting those who served before us. So a strange move, you'd think.
Just like to show that they love Australia generally. So maybe they don't love Australia if they're not going, Matt.
Yeah, well, I mean,
say yes to that.
Sorry. We saw, in the last campaign with Tony Abbott and Julia Gillard, well, not in the last campaign, but, the last couple of leaders, they frequently took time out of their time to attend events, and that was a bipartisan thing where both leaders would attend. So I'm not sure whether it was an oversight or a decision. I mean, we saw Malcolm Turnbull at a mattress factory while this
superannuation changes. Yesterday, your Cabinet Secretary, Arthur Sinodina, said if you win the election, there'll be consultation.
Yeah, well,
having both leaders there, it could get a bit...
Well, you'd think if that was what they wanted to do, though, that was the plan, then you'd think that Malcolm Turnbull, when he was asked about why he wasn't there, which he was asked about while he was at the mattress factory, you'd think he would have said, look, we don't want to politicise it, and so we're going to, not go, we're going to just keep campaigning and we're going to stay away from it. It's definitely hard to say. I guess, that they're kind of moved on for it now and the media have stopped pushing it on them. But, if it was one leader that went, you think it's a weird game theory thing because, if Malcolm Turnbull's not going to go, if Bill Shorten does go and Malcolm Turnbull doesn't, it's a big win for Bill Shorten, and if Malcolm Turnbull goes and Bill Shorten doesn't, it's a big win for Malcolm Turnbull because he's seen that, whichever leader goes seen as the one there. So it is definitely a little bit surprising from my perspective that you saw neither leader attend when, if it was clear to one of the leaders that the other one wasn't going to attend, they would have been like, yes, I'm definitely going to go.
It could be cynicism too. Sometimes we saw with Bill Shorten when he tended to those people who got injured when they overtook his campaign bus up in Newcastle. There was a lot of criticism and cynicism from some sections of the media that it was just cynical attempts just to look like he was being compassionate when perhaps he's not really.
Yeah, definitely.
So perhaps turning up to this event just on your own, it could be seen as a cynical attempt just to
perhaps
score points, basically.
Score points, yeah.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, that could definitely be part of their reasoning. I guess we'll never really know. But I do feel as if there could have definitely been a little bit more media attention on the fact that they weren't there. I think Malcolm Turnbull was asked one question. He said that in all fairness, the defence minister and the shadow defence minister both went. But, I don't know, just a bit. Well, I don't want to stay
Well,
on
if there's
this
no
for too long.
media attention, we're certainly bringing the attention right now on the show.
Yeah, well, indeed. But just moving on to something else that happened this week, there was national account figures released, but
they were released this week. It's did the coalition maybe sort of get a bit of a kick out of that?
yeah, well, I guess when you're a government and positive economic figures come out like a kind of better than
So
expected.
how
quality.
were they? Talk us through them, Matt.
Yeah, so the figures came out and we saw a 1.1% quarterly GDP growth, which is actually a bit bigger than expected. Definitely in a time when developing economies are stagnating. I think it was interesting the night before the announcement to look at that media coverage, because what people were saying at that point is that, it's going to be weak. We're preparing for a weak announcement. And how's that going to affect what's the PM going to say tomorrow when this weak announcement comes out? And all of a sudden, this positive announcement comes out from the ABS, and everyone's scratching their heads going, we weren't anticipating this one.
Just a reminder, guys, you are listening to Politics Live on Upstart with Rudi Edsall, Matt Elmas and Naim Kurt. It's 26 minutes past 1. Was this maybe what emboldened Scott Morrison to make his big claims of war, do you think?
Well, no, that kind of messaging is obviously planned in advance, and that's more of an overall strategy. I think when you're a governing party and a positive economic figure comes out,
it's always good for you.
You spurk it up a bit, and you try to throw shade at the. Yeah, you
Spruik.
Oh, that's right.
Genuinely didn't know what you
I don't know
were
why
saying.
Spruik is the right word. So you spruik it a bit, and you try to play it off as good. We saw Malcolm Turnbull coming out and saying that this kind of growth isn't easy to come across. Labor would take this kind of thing for granted, and you need a coalition government to.
They weren't
achieve
all
this.
positive figures, though. I mean, Bill Shorten did get out there and highlighted that real wage growth has really stagnated over the past period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
not all as rosy as it seems when you sometimes look into the finer detail of it.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think when you're an opposition leader and a positive economic figure comes out, just like when you're the governing body, you blow it up as a great thing. When you're the opposition leader, you're trying to find a way to undermine that messaging, and that definitely was the story from Shorten's side of things. Look, this GDP is one indicator. We've got a lot of broader indicators as well that have come out, and they're not so positive. So we've got to look at the bigger picture. The coalition aren't doing so crash on. Interestingly enough, from the media's perspective, they took a minute out, scratch their heads, and then we saw on 7:30 report that night, Lee Sales kind of asking questions about, okay, well, this GDP figure's come out, it's positive, but what's happening with the rest of the economy? This can't be the whole story. And so they were trying to, fill in the gaps there for people. But it was definitely very interesting to see how the tone changed. The day before, the media was reporting that experts and analysts and economists were saying, look, this is going to be a pretty bad figure. We're not expecting anything good. And that's kind of become the theme with GDP and growth figures in developed countries over the last 10 years. Secular stagnation and things like that have seen a fall off, especially after the financial crisis in GDP growth rates, but particularly for developed economies. And so when we see a little bit of a optimistic figure in this quarterly GDP figure, it was sort of like, oh, hang on a second, we've really got to switch the pace. And by 7:30 with Lee Sales, that was what they were trying to do, fill in the whole story. And by then, Malcolm Turnbull had kind of moved on, I suppose.
So they took some time out from spruiking their GDP results, Matt, to have a crack at Senator Nick Xenophon, didn't they? So the story is that he's been polling not that well?
Well, no, actually kind of the opposite, I suppose. Nick Xenophon's actually been polling pretty well.
I had a 50-50 chance there and I stuffed it up.
Nick Xenophon's been polling, some polling came out earlier this week that said he was polling around 22.5% in South Australia. And there was some other polling that came out saying he could be polling as much as 26.5%. And that's definitely
He was
causing
also
waves.
speaking on Q&A earlier this week, sounding that he was very confident of winning the seat of mayor, that they might be in for a chance there against Jamie Briggs. So Nick Xenophon could have a few senators in the upper house and one maybe or two members down in the lower house as well.
Yeah, well, people are expecting him to turn around 3 in the upper house in South Australia, and some people are saying he could get as many as 4. But what's interesting is just seeing the coalition come out and just completely try and tear him down this week. We had Christopher Pyne come out and say that he's a loose cannon and that, you know, he was part of that Rudd Gillard era and all that chaos. And we had Julie Bishop coming out and saying, "Oh, vote for Nick Xenophon's team is a wasted vote." So they are attacking him as well.
How do you explain this parochial, this independent sort of vote in South Australia? Do you think it comes down to state parochialism?
Well, Nick Xenophon's definitely kind of a celebrity, a political celebrity in South Australia. He has been for quite a while, and you know the Senate voting reforms are really going to benefit him in that way because a lot of other minor parties won't be able to get together in preference against him and try to actively pull him out. So
I tend to think that a lot of these Western states and sort of South Australia, the non-Eastern states, definitely have a bit of a chip on their shoulder when it comes to politics, and they think that politics is too centred on Canberra. And I think that's what really gives a strong vote to those independent voices. And sometimes you can get people like Nick Xenophon or people like Jackie Lambie in these smaller states who can come up.
The Catter family in the north as well.
Yeah.
It's sort of, you certainly see that. Clive Palmer really openly traded off that feeling at the last election, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, and there's certainly an argument that Nick Xenophon might capture a little bit of that Palmer United Party sentiment in South Australia at least. And Nick Xenophon
certainly
has candidates around the country, we should say, not just in South Australia, that are going to capture a little bit of the lower house vote at least.
Yeah, well, speaking of a focus on the big parties here, we've got our regular Batman watch segment. We did want to cue up the Batman theme, but it all fell apart at the last minute, didn't it? But it got a bit personal this week, Matt.
Yeah, so I think we've got an image of Batal's campaign office there in Thornbury.
Alex Batal.
Yeah, Alex Batal's campaign office. She's the Greens candidate for Batman, who's expected to perhaps challenge David Feeney this week. So somebody overnight went and scribbled a bunch of misogynistic slurs and things on the front of her campaign office. She called the police. But she also...
some allegations there in bed with the Liberal Party, I think.
Yeah.
And that's came in line with when the Labor put up a billboard in Batman's with a handshake
on the screen right now.
Handshake agreement between the Greens and Liberals, highlighting the supposed deal that's been made between them, a preference deal where the Greens will be getting Liberal Party preferences in those inner city seats, and in those outer city seats, the Greens will not be running preference tickets. So a lot of some of those Green votes can swing over to Liberals and allow them to hold those seats.
Yeah, so she just outrightly drew the link between David Feeney's advertising and this ad that went up, and so I didn't hear what David Feeney said about that, but
do you think she was milking it a bit?
I
mean, this is just text her on a office block there. You just get out a bit of Ajax spray and wipe, squirt it on there and rub it off.
Her kid was the first one to see it, and I can see how that would have caused her distress, and it's definitely not something. It's definitely
right
not
on Labor.
All right. Let's leave this here. We'll see how it develops. We'll move on to the most anticipated segment of the show. I think it's fair to say the Dutton of the week. Now it's as we hinted at earlier, it's gone to Senator Sarah Hanson-Young from the Greens, hasn't it? Here's what she got caught on.
Look, we're saying that if you pay, in order to make it fair, you should be paying the same tax rate on income as you do for what you're earning on your super. An overhaul of superannuation.
So your retirement income will just be like any other income. There won't be any concessional rate on it.
Why should there be, Matt?
No, I'm asking you.
Well, our system, and what we're saying is that it should be fair.
Am I right, Mark Butley? You'll be taking Sarah Hanson-Young's comments, putting them in leaflets and dropping them as quickly as you possibly can.
Well, to be fair to the Greens Party, I'm not sure that Sarah has quite outlined the Greens Party approach to superannuation, because it would essentially undo 30 years of retirement incomes policy in Australia.
At the moment, the marginal tax rate is 33 cents.
Yeah.
And your superannuation would be 15 cents taxed.
Right. And what would they go up to?
Is that contributions or earnings?
This is the super rate.
For contributions or earnings? I'm not clear.
Yeah, so not
earnings.
Not really Sarah Hanson-Young's best work there. She got little bit tripped up on super policy.
Yeah, that was certainly a bit of an awkward interview for her. I think the next day she did an interview on Sky News and she was definitely a bit more across it then. She probably was briefed quite thoroughly. Adam Bant even had to, come out and clarify stuff a bit later on. So, definitely very...
Yeah, that's all we have time for here at Politics Live. I've been Rudi Edsall, been joined by Matt Elmas and Naim Kurt. See you next week.